And I'd like to welcome you today to a celebration of life for Steve Morris, and specifically by the Morris family, Rick and Elka, their sons Derek and Dustin. I want to especially thank the folks who worked so hard to put this on, Vicki and Bonnie, who spent time to make this location work for us, and the organizations that have shown up today, PNW and Nevada Four-Wheel Drive Associations, RTF, Friends of the Rubicon, everybody working together, Jeepers Jamboree, everybody working together to try to make this such a successful point of everybody being together as Steve would want us to be. This was the whole element of Steve's life, was to bring people together and make this kind of thing work. There are just so many words that have flooded in. I've talked to a lot of people about Steve over the last week, and the word that comes up in every conversation I've had is the word gentleman. That he was the consummate gentleman. Always trying to help, always trying to be there, always trying to be part of the process, always trying to find a better way forward for the organization or for the event or for whatever. It was never a personal desire to move anything forward for Steve. It was always about the organization and to try to make this a better place and a better world for us, and to be able to enjoy the things that we enjoy doing. The other word I often heard was helper and leader. He was a guy who would just pitch in. You need something done, it's going to get done. You're not going to hear about it, it's just going to get done. And a leader, definitely from the back. He did not like that frontline deal, but he was always there, pushing, encouraging, helping, congratulating people for the things that they had done. And he was proud. There's absolutely no word that describes Steve Morris more than proud. And I see a lot of head shaking, and I don't need to explain that word. He was a visionary. He saw things ahead of the rest of the world and acted on that vision. And he didn't act on it alone. He incorporated other people to buy into his visions and things that he felt that were a possibility and practicality-wise that could establish things that would work in the future. And the fact that we're all here is an absolute testament to the fact that those ideas and those visions have moved forward and have worked and have been able to work through generation after generation to make sure that we have public lands for public use, and that the Rubicon Trail is open, and that Jeepers Jamboree succeeds, and the association continues to grow and carry forward those things that the association is about. Everybody I talked to as a past president of this organization used the word continuity. The ability to bring forward an organization, to birth it basically, and then to see it grow with each president and move that forward. And I'll come back to that, but that continuity is what has made this association so great and has kept it on track so well. He was a friend, a supporter of what you did, a builder, a fixer, a doer. But more than anything about Steve was it, in my mind, he was a man who was able to identify himself not by his vocation. People don't know, many people don't know whether he was a doctor, a lawyer, a builder, a whatever, a chemist. It doesn't make any difference. He was defined by his avocations, the desire to keep the Rubicon Trail open, his desire to provide public access to Rubicon Springs, his desire to create an organization that could move forward the things that are important and the ideals and the practices that would make public lands open to public people. And the association was always more than that for him. It was not just the physical work, whether it was a conservation project where you were actually out pounding or cutting up wood or something, or a convention where it was a meeting. It was those sit around the campfire at your club meetings or your runs, and sharing camaraderie and building family units and letting your children learn from other children and from other adults. This is what Steve wanted to build. And he built it. I mean, it's here. It's here today, and it's here because he pushed so hard to make sure that happened. But as I said, avocation, that's what it was about. Yes, he built homes. Yes, he helped build several supermarket deals. He built apartment complexes. He sold Jeep for Ken Collins in South Lake Tahoe. He worked for Jeep Corporation. He did all of these other things, but it was his avocations. I don't know that there's anybody here who knew him from his vocation. It was always about his love from the heart for the things that he wanted to move forward in life. And I think we're going to jump to the Rubicon Trail. This is 1947. He's in a Dodge pickup, street-tired Dodge pickup, driving across the Rubicon Trail with a couple of friends. Fell in love with the place. Now you have to understand that this was a Rubicon Trail before there was a Loon Lake Dam, before there was a Buck Island Dam, before there was a water connection between the two, that there was still a hotel standing in Wentworth Springs and one standing in Rubicon Springs. Things that most of us will never ever know or never understand. But this was the Rubicon Trail he fell in love with. And he wanted to keep that as a possibility for generations to come to enjoy that trail experience, the ability to get from one place to another and enjoy that. And he found the Jeepers Jamboree was the place and the way to make sure that the maximum number of people could make that happen, some of whom that would be their only four-wheel drive experience in their life. Some it might create a spark that lasted a lifetime by being able to go. You never know. You never know who you meet on a big event like that. And the other thing about that is that everybody is equal on those runs. It doesn't make any difference how much money you have, who you work for, what you do. You're out here, and your goal is to get across the trail and enjoy yourself. And everybody's together in that, and everybody's trying to move that needle forward for themselves and for others. And so Steve just relished in that. He loved it, loved the experience of the Jamboree, being part of that, giving history lessons, the trailer float races, whatever it was, and a nip of scotch now and then. So, but he found in Rubicon Springs the soul of what he could do and how he could do that. He was part of the whole idea that we need to keep Rubicon Springs in private ownership, keep it out of the Forest Service's hands in a way that we can continue to manage its future and provide public access and public recreation. And that is a gift to us that many of us don't understand. And a lot of people are angry about how they charge you to camp down there. Man, if they didn't charge you to camp, you wouldn't be camping there any longer. So it's a huge balancing act in there. And Steve threw that money in there to make that. Steve and Betty threw that money in there to make that happen, not because they thought they were going to make $1 million on it. They did it because they believed in what you want to do. And that was a huge, huge contribution. And so, as the Rubicon Trail experience moved forward, this way predated the idea of the NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, FLPMA, the Federal Land Management Policy Act, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, CEQA. All of those deals were non-existent when Steve first started going across the Rubicon. And as he worked toward trying to make sure that we could continue to do these things, he had to find a way to work within that structure to be able to make that happen. And his service to ROC, the Rubicon Oversight Committee, was every time they met, he was there. And he wasn't there because he wanted his private property protected. He wasn't there because, there's a business that might make money from doing this. He was there because the public has the right to recreate on public land. And he was always an advocate for the trail. And that's what he wanted, and that's what he wanted to succeed in. And the other thing was there was no wilderness, not until 1964. So for many years, he was an advocate for a trail, and in part I believe that Desolation Valley was not continued as far south as it would have been otherwise, east as it would have been otherwise, if it weren't for the trail. So these are all successes in their life. And I've actually made it a whole page with only saying Betty's name once. Because if you knew the Morrises, it was the Morrises. It wasn't Steve. And there was a Betty, there was a Steve and Betty, and they did things together and accomplished things on their own and accomplished things together that have made organized and public recreation possible all over the West. And so when you think of Betty and all of those things that she did through the tourism board and being on the OHV commission, just phenomenal contribution to all of organized four-wheeling and the program that has served us so well. But I was talking to Bob Ham, who is the lobbyist who basically single-handedly created the OHV fund as we know it. Many people still call it the Green Sticker Fund, starting in the late 1970s, and late 1960s, working into the 70s, and they were trying to get four-wheel drive owners to join in on that process. And initially there was a lot of pushback about that. Well, you know, that's for dune buggies, that's for motorcycles, that's for this. But Bob Ham went to Steve Morris and said, Cal 4-Wheel has to be part of this. It has to support this, and it has to be part of it. And so Steve went to the board of directors and said, we've got to get behind this process. And again, there was a lot of pushback to that. And the initial legislation did not incorporate four-wheel drive into that process. It wasn't until a year later, after they had decided that they would register all of these vehicles that didn't have street licenses, they came up with a formula by which gas tax would be put together based on use off-road and put into that fund. And that is what makes this happen. And it was Steve's doing behind the scenes, and eventually with Lee Chevet, who was then the president of Cal 4-Wheel, to be able to move that forward to a point where that became not only the law, but the future of four-wheel drive recreation in the state of California. And Lee Chevet took from that not only the presidency of Cal 4-Wheel, but became the deputy director of the entire program and moved that program into its reality. Lee Chevet took legislation and turned it into reality as far as a program, grants program, the whole SVRA, State Vehicle Recreation Area program. That was all put together under Lee Chevet's watch, and Steve was there. You need to make sure that the federal government can get money. You need to know that we can get money for the Rubicon Trail. You need to know that Barrett Lake needs to stay open. How can we do that? How can we get that done? And Steve was always there in the background. How do you do this? How do you do this? And Lee Chevet was the guy who answered those questions and helped with that. And obviously, for those of you who've been around Jeepers Jamboree, Lee Chevet was, he was the guy. But it was Steve quietly in the background. Hey, good job. Way to get that done. So his ability to do those kinds of things, just phenomenal. But I want to jump to Cal 4-Wheel for a second, and specifically the past presidents. Steve just so appreciated everybody who ever had that position. We all worshiped him because he was the guy who started it all. He was the guy that swore every last one of us into office. He was there every year in February to swear us in, to say, hey, we're going to make this association great. We're going to do this. We're going to make this happen. And we were in awe of him. He was in awe of us. He would thank us repeatedly for our service. And I often think of Steve, when he's standing on top of Steve's Rock guiding people, very much as the past presidents. We were all different. He's standing up there, he's watching that vehicle come up, he's like, that guy's got these tires, and he's got that motor, and he needs that line, maybe he'll get up here, probably gonna have to pull a winch out on this, whatever that is the same way with the past presidents. He looked at us for our value, for the things that we could do, and how he could help fill in those things that we didn't do well. And supported us, created a system by which we met at every convention to reward what? What is the past president's award for? It's for that quiet doer in the association. It's not for somebody who stepped up, put their hand up, yeah, I'll do this, I'll do that. It's that quiet doer in the association. And that was Steve's. He wanted to reward that because he was so proud of the past presidents he was even more proud of everybody who was in the association, because he recognized that every family and every person only has limited dollars to do various things. And they have chosen the recreation of four-wheel drive. They could be in a boat, they could be camping, they could be taking yacht trips, they could be climbing Mount Everest, they could do anything. They have decided to place their money into off-highway vehicle recreation. And Steve was supportive of that, proud to see that pass on generation to generation. And he worked so hard in his last few years to try to incorporate the history of the association. Worked hours and hours with Bonnie to try to put that together. But for Steve, history was not just putting something in a box or a picture in an envelope or an album. He wanted it to show the possibilities of the future. That the past is how you grow the future, not how, oh, well, we did it that way then. That was how it is, what can be, what is successful. Why are those people all smiling in that picture? How can we recreate that? That was what Steve wanted to make history to be. He wants that to be our legacy, that we continue to move forward, that we continue to work together, that we continue to make those things happen. And he doesn't care and never cared where you joined that time frame, whether it was 2 months ago or 28 years ago or 30 or 60 years ago. It doesn't make any difference. Yes, you have a different history as you move along, but it's all about the goals and aims of the association and forwarding those forward. And that's what he wanted to do, was create history into possibilities. He loved the camaraderie and the sense of purpose and the families. He loved that. I talked to Dr. Dusty Sieber yesterday, and he was telling me a story about when he was a little kid and they were trying to get into the Sacramento Jeepers. And they had to do a 3 deal. You had to go on 3 campouts with the Jeepers before they would vote you in or out, kind of the off the island thing or whatever. And so they ended up at Cache Creek up toward Clear Lake. And Dusty gets up early in the morning with his fishing pole, heads down to the creek, and man, well, you know, he's got 2 fish. He's so proud of himself, he walks back to camp, got these 2 fish. And everybody in camp is looking at him, and, oh, yeah, wow, way to go, Dusty, got 2 nice trout there. And Steve Morris walks over and goes, you know, it's not trout season. You're going to jail for those. And poor Dusty Siebert at 9 years old is like, oh, man, I heard about jail. And Betty reaches over and says, I'll get a fry pan and we'll get rid of the evidence. And that was Steve and Betty. I mean, Steve was right there with all the answers about what was legal, what couldn't, what could, what couldn't, what parameters, what you could do. So, and the same thing came later when there was a lot of pressure on the Rubicon to get closed or modify our activity and water and all of these things. And Steve and Betty had worked so hard early on to get information and education out to as many people as they could. They started by printing up these little flyers that they would send to owners of Jeeps and four-wheel drive vehicles all over the state to try to get them to understand why it was so important to be part of a process in an organization, work toward land use, be together. He knew that could change the needle of where the Rubicon Trail was going to go. And he knew that without education at the beginning of the trail, this was not going to work. And they needed a place to do that. And he played I Spy on the old regulator's cabin at the bottom of the Loon Lake Spillway and said, hey, if we move that up here, we can put that up here, we can use it as a kiosk, we can hand out information. It took them 2 tries. Well, actually more than that. Helicopter. Finally, they had to get Dana up there with a tow truck and flatbed trailer and a bunch of guys winching that truck and trailer across the slab to be able to move that where it is. Steve, all the time over there with his paper, yeah, we need 14 vehicles this way, we need 7 winch lines, you winch, I'll winch, they'll winch, boom, we'll have it over there and set it in place. But he wasn't trying to take credit for that. He wasn't trying to say, hey, it's just, we need this is how it can be accomplished, let's go do this. And it did, and it happened, and it was created.
Steve's geometry.
Steve's geometry, there it is. So, I just one more second, I want to talk about Chevet and Chappie. Gene Chappie was the guy behind the legislation that created the OHV He was also a Jeepers Jamboree guy. There's Chappie Rock still to this day up above the slabs. He and Betty and Steve worked closely together in every aspect they could, and it was just such a good situation. Chappie worked his way up from the state legislature to the state senate and on to Washington, D.C., where he helped create the Sims Act, which federally does the same things. And Betty was there as her part of being on the early Blue Ribbon Coalition board and the tourism board, where she could tout the successes of Jeepers Jamboree, bringing industry and commerce to small towns that otherwise were drying up. Hey, look at this, man. You create an event using OHV, snowmobiles, whatever. You can make this happen. And between all of that, it was just this great movement toward things that have sustained themselves. I got on the OHV commission years after Betty had stopped serving, and she came to me and said, you know, Gene Chappie put this all together. And he told me specifically that he hoped, this was 1971, that we could continue to have OHV in the state for 20 years. That he didn't think that it could last 20 years, but this program was what might make that go that far. And Betty served in the next 20 years, and I served in the next 20 years. And so that vision that they put together was all about the idea that well-managed, well-educated users will keep the public lands protected enough to be able to continue what we do. And those were all behind-the-scenes situations that worked for Steve and pushed those things forward at every turn. And